The crisp October air carried a hint of approaching winter as James Bennet strode through Central Park, his polished Italian leather shoes crunching fallen leaves. At 42, the CEO of Bennet Financial Group cut an impressive figure, tall, with salt and pepper hair that added distinction rather than age. 6 years of building his company into a respected investment firm had consumed his life, a fact his divorce papers had spelled out in painful clarity 4 months earlier. Irreconcilable differences, the lawyer had said. What they meant was James worked too much. Victoria wanted more than occasional dinners and weekend appearances. After 8 years of marriage, they had drifted apart like ships passing in fog, signaling occasionally but never truly connecting. James checked his watch, a habit he couldn't break even on his rare Saturday morning off. The quarterly reports could wait. His therapist had insisted on these walks, claiming they would center him. James remained skeptical, but had to admit the rhythm of walking through the park settled something in his chest that had been tight since signing those final papers. He rounded the curve near the Bethesda fountain, mentally composing an email to his CFO when he saw her, Victoria, his ex-wife. She sat on a bench facing the water, reading a book as she always did, a paper cup of what was undoubtedly chai tea beside her. Her chestnut hair was longer now, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves, but it wasn't her hair that made James stop mid-stride, his breath catching. It was the unmistakable curve of her stomach beneath her open coat. Victoria was pregnant. Very pregnant. His mind raced, calculating months and possibilities. 4 months since the divorce, but pregnancy like that, she had to be at least 6 months along, maybe 7, which meant she had been pregnant when they divorced. When she signed the papers without a word about a child, his child, it had to be. They had been trying for years before things fell apart. Before he could process what he was doing, James found himself standing before her, casting a shadow across her book. Victoria looked up, her green eyes widening in shock, then something else. Guilt? "James," she said, closing her book, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Evidently," he replied, his voice strained as he gestured toward her stomach. "Were you planning to tell me at all?" Victoria's hand moved protectively over her belly. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" James felt heat rising in his face. "You hid this from me? We're talking about my child." A flash of something, anger perhaps, crossed Victoria's face. "You shouldn't make assumptions, James. Not everything is as it appears." "Then explain it to me," he demanded, aware they were drawing attention but beyond caring. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been hiding my child for months while finalizing our divorce." Victoria glanced around at the curious onlookers, then gathered her things. "Not here. This isn't a conversation for public consumption." She stood with a grace that belied her condition. "There's a cafe on Columbus. If you want answers, meet me there in 15 minutes. James watched her walk away, stunned by the encounter and the implications swirling through his mind. 8 years of marriage, years of trying for a baby together with no success, fertility treatments that had strained their relationship, and now this? Had she been seeing someone else? The thought landed like a punch to his gut. 15 minutes later, James sat across from Victoria in a quiet corner of the cafe, 2 untouched coffees between them. She looked different. Not just the pregnancy, but something in her eyes. A resolve he hadn't seen in their final years together. "The baby isn't yours, James," she said quietly, ripping the bandage off without preamble. The relief James expected didn't come. Instead, an unexpected sense of loss swept through him. "Then whose?" "That's not your concern," Victoria replied. "But you should know I was already pregnant when we signed the divorce papers. I found out just days before. And you didn't think I deserved to know." James fought to keep his voice level. "After everything we went through, all those treatments, the disappointments, would it have changed anything?" Victoria asked, her eyes challenging him. "Would you have suddenly started coming home before midnight, cancelled fewer business trips, put me before the company even once?" Each question hit like an accusation, and James found himself without answers. The truth was, he didn't know. The company had become his refuge when the disappointments of their infertility journey had become too much to bear. "You still should have told me," he insisted, though his voice had lost some of its edge. Victoria sighed, her hand making small circles on her stomach. "Perhaps. But I made a choice for myself, James. For once, I put my needs first. The implications hung between them. Had he really been so absent that Victoria had turned to someone else? The thought was a knife twist of betrayal mixed with his own guilt. "There's something else you should know," Victoria said, her voice softening slightly. "Something I discovered during my first trimester that explains a lot about our struggle." James braced himself, unsure he wanted to hear more revelations. "What?" "I have a genetic condition. It's why we couldn't conceive naturally." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "It wasn't your fault, James. It was never your fault." Years of silent self-recrimination, of wondering what was wrong with him, crashed through James's mind. How many nights had he stayed late at the office, rather than face another disappointed look from Victoria after a negative test? How much had he blamed himself? "Why tell me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because despite everything, I never wanted you to carry that burden," Victoria replied. "And because there's more to this story than you understand." Just then, Victoria's phone chimed. She glanced at it, her expression changing to one of concern. "I have to go. It's important." "Victoria, wait," James started, but she was already gathering her things. "I'm staying at the Carlisle through next week," she said, standing. "Room 512. Come by tomorrow evening at 7 if you want the whole truth. I promise I'll explain everything." With that, she was gone, leaving James with more questions than answers, and the unsettling feeling that his carefully reconstructed post-divorce life was about to be upended completely. James remained at the cafe table long after Victoria had departed, his coffee growing cold between his palms. The encounter had left him disoriented, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. 8 years of marriage, followed by a divorce he'd reluctantly accepted as inevitable, and now this bombshell. The waitress passed by, offering a refill he absently declined. His mind was busy reconstructing the timeline. If Victoria was 6 or 7 months pregnant, and they'd been divorced for 4 months, then the conception would have occurred while they were still married. The implication of infidelity stung, though James recognized the hypocrisy in his reaction. Their marriage had been effectively over for at least a year before the papers were signed. 2 people occupying the same elegant brownstone, but living separate lives. Still, the thought of Victoria with someone else during their marriage twisted something painful inside him. They had grown apart, certainly, but he had never considered that she might have sought comfort elsewhere. Perhaps he should have. Perhaps that was just another sign of how disconnected he'd become. James pulled out his phone, opening his calendar reflexively. Tomorrow evening at 7. He had a dinner with potential investors from Singapore, something he would normally never reschedule. His finger hovered over the screen before he swiftly moved the dinner to lunch instead. Some answers were worth rearranging even the most important business. Outside the cafe, autumn painted the city in warm hues of orange and gold, a stark contrast to the cold confusion settling in James's chest. He walked aimlessly, barely noticing the bustling Saturday crowds or the street performers that would normally catch his attention. His mind replayed Victoria's words. "It wasn't your fault, James. It was never your fault." For years, their inability to conceive had been an unspoken burden between them. Despite doctors' assurances that these things sometimes happened without explanation, James had privately wondered if the stress of building his company had been the cause. Victoria had never blamed him outright, but he'd seen the questions in her eyes after each failed attempt, each negative test, each procedural next step that led nowhere. And now she was pregnant by someone else, carrying a child they had dreamed of together. James found himself outside his office building, having walked there on autopilot. Bennett Financial Group occupied 3 floors of the gleaming Midtown Tower, a testament to his single-minded determination over the past 6 years. He swiped his access card and rode the elevator to the 34th floor, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings even on a weekend. His corner office overlooked the city, the view he'd once proudly shown Victoria when they'd moved in. "This is just the beginning," he'd told her, arm around her waist. She'd smiled, but there had been something reserved in her expression that he'd chosen to ignore. James sank into his leather chair and swiveled to face the window. The city sprawled before him, people moving like tiny figures in a diorama, each with their own complicated lives and secrets. Somewhere out there was the father of Victoria's child, a man who had succeeded where James had failed, in more ways than one. His desk phone rang, startling him. Only a handful of people had his direct line, and fewer still would call on a Saturday. "Bennett," he answered, his voice automatically shifting to its professional cadence. "James, it's David." His younger brother calling from Chicago. "Just checking if we're still on for dinner when I'm in town next week?" James pinched the bridge of his nose, having completely forgotten about his brother's visit. "Yes, of course. Tuesday at 7. "You okay? You sound off." "I just saw Victoria," James said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them. A pause. "How is she?" "Pregnant." The word felt strange on his tongue. Another pause, longer this time. "Shit, James." "Is it?" "Not mine, apparently, though she was pregnant during our divorce and never mentioned it." David let out a low whistle. "That's complicated. What are you going to do?" "She's invited me to talk tomorrow. Get the whole truth, whatever that means." "And you're going?" David asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Wouldn't you?" David sighed. "Probably. Just be careful, okay? You've been doing better these past few months." It was true. After the initial shock of the divorce, James had thrown himself into work with even greater intensity, then gradually found a new rhythm. His therapist called it healing. James thought of it more as adapting, the way a tree grows around an obstacle. "I'll be fine," James assured his brother, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. "It's just a conversation." After hanging up, James stared at the framed photo still sitting on his credenza, he and Victoria on their honeymoon in Santorini, sun-kissed and laughing against a backdrop of white buildings and azure sea. He couldn't remember the last time they'd laughed together like that. His assistant had discreetly removed most photos of Victoria from his office after the divorce, but somehow this one had remained. Perhaps because it represented not just Victoria, but a version of himself he barely recognized anymore. Relaxed, present, happy, in a way that had nothing to do with closing deals or quarterly projections. As the afternoon light shifted across his desk, James found himself wondering what revelations awaited him tomorrow evening, and why, despite everything, Victoria had chosen to tell him about her condition. After months of accepting their marriage was truly over, he now faced the unsettling possibility that there were depths to their story he had yet to understand. The Carlisle. Room 512, 7 o'clock. Each detail lodged in his mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. The Carlisle's elegant lobby bustled with the refined energy of a Sunday evening as James approached the front desk. He had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from countless business meetings. The concierge directed him to the elevators with a discreet nod, apparently accustomed to directing visitors to Victoria's room. Standing before room 512, James straightened his tie and took a steadying breath before knocking. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Victoria in a loose-fitting navy dress that accentuated her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, a stark contrast to the polished appearance she had maintained throughout their marriage. "You came," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice despite having invited him. "You said you'd explain everything," James replied, stepping into the suite when she moved aside. "I have questions that need answers." The room was spacious and tastefully decorated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of Central Park. Papers and folders were spread across the writing desk, alongside a laptop displaying what appeared to be medical information. A half-eaten room service meal sat on the coffee table. "Would you like something to drink?" Victoria offered, gesturing toward a sideboard with an array of beverages. "They have excellent herbal tea." James shook his head. "I'd prefer we get straight to the point." Victoria nodded, lowering herself carefully onto the sofa. She seemed tired, dark circles visible beneath her eyes that makeup would have concealed. "Where would you like me to start?" "The beginning would be helpful," James said, choosing to remain standing. "You said you have a genetic condition." Victoria's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. "It's called balanced translocation," she explained. "Essentially, parts of 2 chromosomes have swapped places. It doesn't affect me, but it made natural conception nearly impossible." "And you discovered this during your pregnancy?" "Yes, during genetic testing in my first trimester." Victoria's eyes met his. "The doctor said I've always had it. It explains why all our attempts failed." James processed this information slowly. So all those years, all those treatments, were unlikely to succeed without specific interventions we never tried, Victoria finished for him. If we had known about my condition, we might have pursued different options. The weight of this revelation settled between them. Years of disappointment, tension, and eventual estrangement. How much might have been different with this knowledge? That still doesn't explain why you kept your pregnancy from me during the divorce, James said, finally taking a seat in the armchair opposite her. Or who the father is. Victoria took a deep breath. That's where things get complicated. The baby is technically not biologically mine either, at least not in the traditional sense. James frowned, confusion replacing his simmering anger. What are you talking about? I'm a gestational surrogate, James. Victoria's words hung in the air between them. I'm carrying this child for someone else. Of all the scenarios James had imagined, this had never crossed his mind. A surrogate for whom? Victoria hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. For your sister, Rachel. The room seemed to tilt around James. Rachel. My sister Rachel, who lives in London, who hasn't been able to carry to term. Victoria nodded. She and Michael have been trying for years. After 3 miscarriages, her doctor suggested surrogacy. She reached out to me about 8 months ago, not long after. After I missed our anniversary dinner because of the Tokyo merger, James finished, the memory returning with painful clarity. He had sent flowers and promised to make it up to her, but it had been the final disappointment in a long series of broken promises. Yes, Victoria confirmed. We met for coffee and she told me about their struggles. It felt meaningful somehow, a way to help create the family we had always wanted, just not in the way we expected. James stood abruptly, moving to the window to gather his thoughts. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to his internal turmoil. Why didn't you tell me? Why the secrecy? Victoria's reflection in the glass showed her uncertainty. At first I was going to, but then I found the email from your lawyer about divorce proceedings. Her voice wavered slightly. You hadn't even mentioned it to me, James. I discovered you wanted to end our marriage through a misdirected email. James winced at the memory. He had indeed consulted a lawyer before speaking with Victoria, telling himself he was merely exploring options. The email, accidentally sent to their shared account, had forced the conversation he'd been avoiding. After that, Victoria continued, I decided my choice to be Rachel's surrogate was separate from our divorce. We were already living separate lives. I didn't want you to try to stop me or complicate things for Rachel. And Rachel went along with this? James asked, turning back to face Victoria. My own sister kept this from me. She wanted to tell you, Victoria admitted. I asked her not to. I convinced her it would only make the divorce more complicated, that you had enough on your plate with the company's expansion. James tried to process the layers of deception, feeling betrayed by the 2 women he had been closest to. So you're telling me that my soon-to-be-born niece or nephew has been growing inside my ex-wife and no one thought I deserved to know? When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is, Victoria said, a defensive edge entering her voice. I made this decision for myself, James. After years of putting your needs and the company first, I chose to do something meaningful on my terms. Her words struck home with unexpected force. Had he really been so self-absorbed that Victoria felt she couldn't live her own life while married to him? Does anyone else know? He asked. Your parents, Victoria admitted. They're coming for the birth next month, and David figured it out when he saw me in Chicago 3 months ago. David knows? The betrayal deepened. Is there anyone in my family who hasn't been keeping secrets from me? Victoria sighed. They respected my wishes, James. This wasn't a conspiracy against you. James paced the room, trying to make sense of the situation. So what happens after the birth? You just hand the baby over to Rachel and move on with your life? That's how surrogacy works, yes, Victoria replied, though something in her expression suggested there was more to the story. And where will you go? What will you do? I've accepted a position at the Thompson Gallery in London, Victoria said. I start 3 months after delivery. London, James repeated. Of course, to be near Rachel and the child. The art history degree Victoria had set aside to support his career was finally being put to use, thousands of miles away. I'm returning to my roots, Victoria said quietly. I think we both need a fresh start. James stopped his pacing, struck by a sudden realization. Yesterday at the cafe, you got a call and had to leave abruptly. Was that Rachel? Victoria nodded. She and Michael flew in yesterday morning. They'll be here until after the birth. Are they staying here too? James asked, glancing around the suite. No, they have a place in Soho. Victoria shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, wincing slightly. Are you all right? James asked, noticing her discomfort. Just Braxton Hicks contractions, Victoria explained. False labor. I've been having them on and off for a week. James watched as she breathed through the discomfort, struck by the strange intimacy of the moment. This woman, once his wife, was now carrying his sister's child, a niece or nephew he would know, while Victoria moved to another continent. There's something else you should know, Victoria said, after the contraction passed. Something Rachel probably won't tell you herself. James braced himself for yet another revelation. What now? The egg. It wasn't Rachel's, Victoria said softly. Her eggs weren't viable after the cancer treatment 10 years ago. They used a donor egg fertilized by Michael's sperm. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. 10 years ago, shortly after Rachel and Michael's wedding, Rachel had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer. The treatment had saved her life, but left her unable to produce viable eggs. James had forgotten this detail in the whirlwind of revelations. Who was the donor? James asked, though something in Victoria's expression already gave him the answer. I was, Victoria said simply. Biologically, this child is partly mine, and partly your brother-in-law's. The complexity of the situation struck James with full force. The child Victoria carried was, in a genetic sense, her own, yet she had agreed to give it to Rachel, to let another woman be its mother. That's why you decided to move to London, James realized, to be near the child. Victoria nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Rachel knows I'll never interfere. I'll be Aunt Victoria and nothing more. But yes, I want to be part of their life, even if at a distance. As James tried to absorb this final revelation, Victoria's phone chimed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, her expression changing to one of surprise. It's Rachel, she said. She and Michael are downstairs in the lobby. They were having dinner nearby and thought they might stop by. Victoria looked up at James uncertainly. I can tell them it's not a good time. James stood frozen, unprepared for this potential reunion with his sister under such circumstances. Before he could respond, Victoria's face suddenly contorted in pain, far more intense than before. Victoria? James moved toward her instinctively. That wasn't Braxton Hicks, she gasped, clutching her stomach. My water just broke. Stay calm, James said, his crisis management skills kicking in automatically. I'll call the hospital. Tell Rachel, Victoria managed between deep breaths. She and Michael need to be there. James texted his sister while simultaneously calling the hospital. Victoria's due date was still 3 weeks away, but the staff assured him they would be ready when they arrived. After a brief, tense conversation with the front desk, he arranged for the hotel's car service to take them directly to Mount Sinai Hospital. Can you walk? James asked, helping Victoria to her feet. She nodded, clutching his arm, as another contraction seized her. They're coming fast, she gasped. In the elevator, Victoria leaned against the wall, her face pale. This isn't how I imagined you finding out, she said, attempting a weak smile. None of this is how I imagined anything, James replied, his mind still reeling from the evening's revelations. The elevator doors opened to reveal Rachel and Michael in the lobby, their expressions shifting from casual expectation to alarm as they took in the scene. The baby's coming, James announced, supporting Victoria as she stepped forward. Rachel rushed to Victoria's other side, her dark hair, so similar to James's own, falling forward as she bent to help. You're in labor. Are you sure? My water broke, Victoria confirmed through gritted teeth. Contractions about 4 minutes apart. Michael, tall and steady as always, immediately took charge. I'll bring the car around, he said, his British accent more pronounced under stress. James, can you help get her outside? The next minutes passed in a blur of activity, the doorman clearing a path, Victoria breathing through another contraction as they helped her into the waiting SUV, Rachel climbing in beside her, while James and Michael took the front seats. Mount Sinai East Entrance, Michael directed the driver, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle. In the back seat, Rachel held Victoria's hand, speaking in soothing tones. Remember your breathing exercises. That's it, just like we practiced. James watched in the rearview mirror, struck by the bond between these two women, his sister and his ex-wife, connected by something deeper than he had understood until now. "How long have the contractions been happening?" Rachel asked Victoria. "On and off all day," Victoria admitted. "I thought they were just Braxton Hicks." "You should have called earlier," Rachel chided gently. "I had an important conversation scheduled," Victoria replied, her eyes meeting James's in the mirror. The hospital entrance appeared ahead, its lights bright against the darkening evening sky. Medical staff waited with a wheelchair, having been alerted by James's call. As they helped Victoria inside, a nurse approached Rachel. "Are you the intended mother?" she asked. Rachel nodded, her face a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. "Yes, my husband and I are the parents." "And you?" the nurse asked, turning to James. Before he could answer, Victoria spoke through another contraction. "He's the uncle, Rachel's brother." Something in her tone, perhaps the emphasis on his relationship to the child rather than to her, made James feel suddenly like an outsider. He stood awkwardly as Victoria was wheeled away, Rachel and Michael following close behind. "Family can wait in the lounge on the 3rd floor, the nurse informed him, before hurrying after the others. Family. The word echoed in James's mind as he made his way to the elevator. He was family, the child's uncle, yet he felt utterly disconnected from the unfolding drama. He had learned of his niece or nephew's existence less than 24 hours ago, and now stood waiting for the birth with no time to process the complex emotions swirling inside him. The 3rd floor waiting room was mercifully quiet, with just 2 other families huddled in opposite corners. James chose a seat near the window, gazing out at the city lights without really seeing them. His phone buzzed with a message from David. "Rachel just texted about Victoria. Are you at the hospital? What the hell is going on?" James stared at the screen, unsure how to even begin explaining. He settled for a brief reply. "Yes, at Mount Sinai. Victoria in labor. Will call when I know more." Time passed with excruciating slowness. James found himself pacing, checking his watch, scrolling mindlessly through emails without absorbing their content. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with tension. "Any news?" James asked, crossing to his brother-in-law. Michael ran a hand through his sandy hair. "The doctor says she's progressing quickly. First-time mothers usually take longer, but apparently Victoria's body is exceptionally efficient." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Rachel's with her now." "And how are you holding up?" James asked, noting the slight tremor in Michael's hands. "Terrified, excited, in disbelief that after all these years, we're finally going to be parents." Michael met James's gaze directly. "I'm sorry you found out this way. Rachel wanted to tell you months ago." "Victoria explained," James said, finding it easier to focus on Michael's feelings than his own. "I understand why Rachel honored her wishes." Michael nodded gratefully. "Victoria has given us an incredible gift. We can never repay her." A nurse appeared behind Michael, her expression urgent. "Mr. Harrington, your wife is asking for you. Things are moving very quickly now." Michael's eyes widened. "I have to go," he said to James, already turning to follow the nurse. "Go," James urged. "I'll be here." Alone again, James resumed his pacing, the events of the past 24 hours replaying in his mind. The chance encounter in the park, Victoria's initial revelation, the complex truth about the surrogacy, and now the unexpected early labor. It was as if fate had compressed a month's worth of emotional upheaval into a single weekend. His phone rang, displaying his parents' number. Of course, Rachel would have called them too. "James?" His mother's voice was taut with excitement. "We just heard from Rachel. We're catching the first flight from Phoenix in the morning." "Mom," James said, suddenly realizing they didn't know he was at the hospital. "I'm here at Mount Sinai now." A pause. "You're there? But how—" "It's a long story," James cut in. "I just found out about all of this yesterday, completely by accident." "Oh, James." His mother's voice softened with understanding. "Victoria wanted to handle it her way. We respected her decision, even though we disagreed. Everyone respected her decision except me," James couldn't help remarking, a trace of bitterness creeping into his voice. "You and Victoria were already separated when she agreed to do this for Rachel," his mother reminded him gently. She didn't owe you an explanation. The truth of this statement stung, though James knew she was right. He and Victoria had effectively ended their marriage long before the legal dissolution. Her choice to become a surrogate had been made as an independent woman, not as his wife. I know, he conceded. It's just a lot to process. For all of us, his mother agreed. But isn't it remarkable, after everything Rachel has been through, to finally have this chance at motherhood? It's nothing short of a miracle. James thought of his sister, who had fought cancer at 28 and emerged victorious, but permanently changed. How many times had she confided in him her fear that she would never be a mother? And now Victoria, the woman who had shared his name and his bed for 8 years, had made Rachel's dream possible. It is remarkable, he admitted, feeling something shift inside him, a perspective changing, perhaps. 2 hours later, Michael burst into the waiting room, his face transformed by joy. "It's a girl," he announced, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect in every way. James stood, emotions he couldn't name washing over him. And Victoria, Rachel, both doing wonderfully, Michael assured him. Victoria was amazing. The doctors said they rarely see such a smooth delivery, especially with a first pregnancy. The words highlighted the strangeness of the situation. In some alternate reality, this might have been James and Victoria's child, the family they had tried so hard to create together. "Can I see them?" James asked, uncertain of protocol in this unprecedented situation. Michael hesitated only briefly. "Victoria asked for you, actually. Come on." Following Michael through the maternity ward, James steeled himself for what awaited. Nothing could have prepared him for the scene in Victoria's room, however. His ex-wife, exhausted but radiant, sitting up in bed. Rachel in a chair beside her, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Both women looking up at him with expressions so similar, pride, exhaustion, and a profound, transcendent joy, that it momentarily took his breath away. "James," Rachel said softly, rising carefully with the infant in her arms. "Meet your niece, Eliza Victoria Harrington." She stepped forward, tilting the bundle so James could see the tiny face within, red and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the world. "Would you like to hold her?" Rachel asked. Before James could answer, Victoria spoke from the bed. "He should. She's family, after all." There was something in Victoria's tone, a gentle emphasis on the word family, that struck James deeply. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the end of their marriage and the secrets kept, Victoria had created this connection that would bind them all together forever. As James carefully accepted the impossibly small bundle from his sister, feeling the weight of his newborn niece in his arms for the first time, he looked across at Victoria, really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time in years, their eyes met over the child that was, in the most complicated and beautiful way, a product of them all. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Victoria smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Some gifts are too precious not to share," she replied. In that moment, with Eliza's tiny fingers curling reflexively around his thumb, James felt the first genuine stirring of forgiveness, not just for Victoria, but for himself as well. The weeks following Eliza's birth passed in a whirlwind of activity. James's parents arrived from Phoenix the morning after the delivery, their initial awkwardness around their son quickly dissolving in the presence of their new granddaughter. David flew in from Chicago 2 days later, bringing with him a teddy bear almost as large as the infant herself. For James, these days became a strange dance of rediscovery, of his family, of Victoria in her new role, and of himself as Uncle James, a title that still felt foreign on his tongue. He found himself visiting the hospital daily, then Rachel and Michael's Soho apartment after Victoria and the baby were discharged, drawn by a pull he couldn't fully articulate. Today marked 3 weeks since Eliza's birth, and James stood in the elevator of Rachel's building, a small gift bag dangling from his fingers. The doors opened directly into the apartment's foyer, a perk of the penthouse that Michael's successful architecture firm had afforded them. "James," Rachel greeted him, her face lighting up as she ushered him inside. His sister looked tired but happier than he had seen her in years, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a burp cloth draped over one shoulder. "You're just in time. Victoria's getting ready to leave." The words stopped him mid-step. "Leave? Today?" Rachel nodded, her expression softening. Her flight to London is tomorrow morning. She's saying her goodbyes. James had known, abstractly, that Victoria would be leaving once she had recovered sufficiently from the birth. The position at the Thompson Gallery awaited her, and there was nothing keeping her in New York. Still, the reality of her imminent departure hit him with unexpected force. "I thought she might stay a bit longer," he said, following Rachel into the living room where Michael sat cradling Eliza. "The doctor cleared her for travel yesterday," Rachel explained, "and I think it's hard for her, James. She needs to start her new chapter." Before James could respond, Victoria emerged from the guest bedroom, a small suitcase beside her. She wore a simple blue dress that highlighted her still recovering figure, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Something about seeing her like this, neither his wife nor visibly pregnant but simply Victoria, made James's chest tighten unexpectedly. "James," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "I didn't know you were coming by today." He held up the gift bag awkwardly. "Just brought something for Eliza. Rachel didn't mention you were leaving." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room, broken only by Eliza's soft cooing from Michael's arms. "Would you two like a moment?" Rachel asked, exchanging a glance with her husband. "Michael and I need to give Eliza her bath anyway." Before either James or Victoria could object, Rachel had scooped Eliza from Michael's arms, and the couple disappeared down the hallway toward the nursery, leaving them alone in the suddenly quiet living room. Victoria moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "It's strange to think I won't see this view again for a while." "London has its own impressive views," James offered, setting the gift bag on the coffee table. "It does," Victoria agreed, turning to face him. Though nothing quite like New York, another silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and shared history. "I never properly thanked you," James finally said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For what you did for Rachel, for our family." He gestured in the direction the others had gone. "Eliza wouldn't exist without you." A soft smile touched Victoria's lips. "She's worth every moment of discomfort, every hormone injection, every strange craving at 3 a.m. "Still," James insisted, "it was an extraordinary gift." Victoria's eyes met his, holding his gaze steadily. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed? We were on that rooftop in Chicago, and you said you wanted us to build something beautiful together." James nodded, the memory vivid despite the years that had passed. "I meant a life together." "I know," Victoria said gently. "And for a while, we did build something beautiful. The company, our home, our travels. But then I got lost in the building and forgot about the beauty," James finished for her, the truth of it settling heavily in his chest. "We both lost our way," Victoria corrected him. "I stopped telling you what I needed, stopped fighting for us when it got too hard." James moved closer, drawn by the honesty of the moment. "When I saw you in the park that day, pregnant, I felt so many things. Anger, betrayal, confusion, but mostly, I felt regret. Regret for what we lost, for the family we never created together." Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Eliza is that family, James. Not in the way we imagined, but she's part of both of us now. Through Rachel, through this incredible, twisted path we've taken, we did build something beautiful together after all." The realization struck James with unexpected force, the truth in Victoria's words. Though their marriage had ended, their connection had transformed into something different, something that would endure through the child now sleeping in the next room. "Your gallery position," James said, changing direction. "Is it what you've always wanted?" Victoria smiled, genuine excitement lighting her features. "It's more than I dared hope for. Contemporary American artists, my own exhibition space in the spring. A chance to use the degree I set aside when you followed me to New York for my career," James finished, acknowledging a truth he had conveniently ignored for years. "It was my choice," Victoria reminded him. "But yes, this is my turn to pursue my passion." James nodded, recognizing the rightness of it. "You'll be brilliant. You always had an eye for talent." "Speaking of which," Victoria said, her tone shifting slightly, "how are things at Bennett Financial? Still working 80-hour weeks?" James laughed softly. "Not exactly. I've been re-evaluating some priorities lately." "Oh?" Victoria's curiosity was evident. I've brought in a new COO to handle daily operations, James explained. Someone who loves the minutiae I always avoided. It's freed me to focus on strategy and client relationships, the parts I actually enjoy. And given you time to become Uncle James, Victoria observed with a smile. That too, he admitted, though I'm still learning what that role entails. So far it seems to involve a lot of awkward burping attempts and staring contests with someone who can't focus her eyes yet. Victoria laughed, the sound familiar, and yet somehow new. You'll be wonderful at it. You always did rise to challenges that mattered to you. From down the hall came the sound of Eliza's cry, followed by Rachel's soothing voice. I should go say my goodbyes, Victoria said, her expression turning wistful. My car to the hotel will be here soon. Victoria, James said impulsively, would you have dinner with me tonight before you leave, just to talk? Surprise registered on her face. Dinner, as in two people sharing a meal and conversation, James clarified quickly. There's still so much I want to understand about everything that's happened. Victoria considered him for a long moment before nodding. I'd like that. My flight's not until morning. I'll pick you up at 7, James suggested. The Carlisle, right? I'll be ready, Victoria agreed as Rachel returned with a freshly bathed and changed Eliza. Someone wants to say goodbye to her surrogate mommy, Rachel said softly, placing the infant in Victoria's arms. James watched as Victoria cradled Eliza, whispering words too quiet for the others to hear. The tenderness in her expression, the gentle way she traced one finger along the baby's cheek, it revealed a side of Victoria he had glimpsed only rarely during their marriage, usually when she thought he wasn't looking. When Victoria finally handed Eliza back to Rachel, both women had tears streaming down their faces. We'll bring her to London for Christmas, Rachel promised, embracing Victoria, and we'll video call every week. Every day for the first month, Victoria countered, trying to smile through her tears. Michael appeared with Victoria's suitcase, and the goodbyes continued. Hugs, promises to stay in touch, final kisses on Eliza's forehead. Through it all, James observed silently, seeing his family through new eyes. The love in the room was palpable, complicated by the unusual circumstances, but no less genuine for it. Later that evening, James and Victoria sat across from each other at a quiet corner table in Maria, the Central Park South restaurant that had once been their special occasion spot. Victoria wore a simple black dress that James had never seen before, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings he had given her for their first anniversary. This feels strange, Victoria admitted, sipping her sparkling water. Like a first date with someone I've known intimately for a decade. I was thinking the same thing, James agreed, studying her face in the candlelight. I know your deepest fears and favorite ice cream flavor, but I'm nervous like a teenager, Victoria laughed. Mint chocolate chip, still the same. Some things don't change, James observed, then added more seriously, and some things do. Their conversation flowed more easily than either had expected, moving from Eliza's daily developments to Victoria's plans for her first exhibition in London, to James's new approach to his company. They carefully avoided reminiscing about their marriage, focusing instead on the present and future. It wasn't until dessert, a shared tiramisu, another old habit, that Victoria asked the question that had been hanging between them all evening. Why did you really want to have dinner tonight, James? After everything that's happened, all the revelations and complications, why this? James set down his fork, considering his words carefully. When I saw you in the park that day, I thought I was looking at a door that had closed forever. Then I discovered you were carrying my niece, that our lives would remain connected in this unexpected way. It made me realize that sometimes endings are actually transformations. Victoria's eyes searched his. What are we transforming into exactly? I don't know, James admitted honestly. Friends, perhaps. Family, in a non-traditional sense. People who once loved each other and now share something different but equally meaningful. I'd like that, Victoria said softly. The friendship part, I mean. After everything, I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me. I could never hate you, James said, reaching across the table to briefly cover her hand with his. I was angry, yes, hurt, definitely, but underneath that was always respect and eventually understanding. As they stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, a light rain had begun to fall, glittering in the streetlights. James hailed a taxi for Victoria, holding the door as she prepared to enter. London will be lucky to have you, he said, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. Victoria paused, 1 foot in the cab. You should come visit sometime. See the gallery. Spend time with Eliza when Rachel and Michael bring her over. I'd like that, James replied, surprised to realize how genuinely he meant it. Victoria hesitated, then reached up to kiss his cheek lightly. Goodbye, James. Thank you for tonight. Not goodbye, James corrected gently. Just until London. As the taxi pulled away, carrying Victoria toward her hotel and her imminent departure, James stood in the light rain, feeling not the closure he had expected, but something more complex, a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. 3 months later, James stood in the elegant confines of the Thompson Gallery in Mayfair, champagne flute in hand, as he surveyed the crowd gathered for the opening of Victoria's first exhibition. Rachel and Michael moved through the space with Eliza, now a more alert and engaging 4-month-old, proudly showing her off to the assembled guests. Victoria caught his eye from across the room, where she was speaking animatedly with a potential buyer. She smiled, excusing herself to make her way toward him. You came, she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. I promised I would, James replied. The exhibition is extraordinary, Victoria. You found artists I've never heard of but should have. That's the highest compliment, she laughed. I'm glad you're here. All of you. As they stood together, watching Rachel show Eliza a particularly colorful canvas, James felt a sense of contentment wash over him. Their story hadn't unfolded as he'd once imagined. There was no traditional happy ending, no neat resolution to the complicated emotions they'd navigated. Instead, there was this, a new constellation of relationships formed from the remnants of what had been lost. A niece who carried Victoria's genes but called Rachel Mother. A friendship emerging from the ashes of a marriage. A family redefined by love rather than convention. You know, James said quietly, when you told me you were a surrogate, I thought you had chosen Rachel over me. But I understand now. You chose life. Creation over ending. Building something beautiful, just in a different way than we planned. Victoria's eyes met his, warm with understanding. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys take us places we never expected to go. As Eliza's laugh echoed through the gallery, James raised his glass in a small toast. To unexpected journeys, then. Victoria clinked her glass against his. And to new beginnings.